Fantastic. Well, Sam, I would love to go around and to introduce everybody kind of in a left to right fashion. If you guys don't mind, I'll start it off. Again, my name is Kim Hale. I'm a VP team lead for medical device at Within3. Been in the medical device industry for 30 plus years now, having worked for companies like Medtronic and Baxter and Smiths Medical, to name a few of those companies. The last 8 years spent more on the digital side of the medical device industry, developing applications and website, Microsoft animations, above skin, below skin animations for various companies, again, selling back into the medical device industry. So again, all total about 30 plus years, and I'm based out of Salt Lake City, Utah. So who would like to go next?
I think we can have Wolf.
I can jump in, yeah. Ulf Baumann, I work for Varian Medical Systems, now a Siemens Healthineers company. Been with Varian for just under 2 years. My focus is entirely on the digital side. So while our core business is centered around delivering radiation and medical and other modalities treatment with big iron and solutions around that, I'm focused exclusively on digitizing software products, processes, and increasingly we're developing fast-growing services and solutions in the enterprise space and in the clinical and financial operational space. Been in the industry, in this medical device industry, again, just under 2 years. I come from a technology background, Cisco, HP, and so on. That's my background in Berkeley, California.
Thank you. Next.
I don't mind going next. I'm Nikola. I'm heading some of the cross-functional AI research efforts at Click Therapeutics. We are a digital therapeutics company that creates software as medical devices. And a lot of our work tries to model the underlying semantics of health data, be it voice, text, other mobile sensors, and try to integrate that with insights from cognitive neuroscience.
Fantastic. Thank you. Next.
I can go next. This is Ajay Panwar. I work for Medtronic as a senior manager in quality organization. I'm responsible for the new product quality, and also and previously I used to lead post-market quality, basically making sure our products are safe out in the field and making any field decisions, and also making sure we have the risk-benefit analysis properly documented and managed throughout the company.
Fantastic. Thank you. And last but not least.
Hi, I'm Kevin Kalish. I'm the Vice President of R&D and Operations for Enclear Therapies. We are a neurotech company trying to improve drug delivery as well as treatment of general neurodegenerative diseases. I have 20 years of medical device experience, 3 with Enclear, and then the rest of my career was between Boston Scientific and Medtronic. Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. Thank you all for being here today. It's interesting because we're talking today about accelerating the medical device development process using new tools and tech that we've developed in what we would call, I guess, I'm not going to call it post-pandemic, but still the pandemic, atmosphere with which we all are in. And it'll be interesting to hear what some of your thoughts, what some of your comments are on that. Regarding with some of the questions that we're going to be talking about. Before we into those questions, I know that Sam I know we have a poll that we would love to conduct for those that are now viewing the panel discussion. We'd love to get your guys' feedback on a couple of questions that we have posed and ready for you guys, which I know will prompt some additional comments, feedback, and questions from the panel and stuff as well. So Sam, can I turn that over to you to conduct our first poll?
Yeah, so ladies and gentlemen, if you look towards the right-hand side on the polls icon underneath panelists, the first poll question that we have is, has human factors regarding your device development changed due to COVID-19? Yes, no, a little bit. So I'll give everyone a couple seconds to answer that. Okay, and we'll move on to the next poll question. underneath the panelist icon. If looking to conduct trials in the near future, would you go with decentralized clinical research or centralized research for your specific device? Again, yes, no, maybe. Third question that we have for everyone is, for those that already have a device already in the market, what were your biggest regulatory challenges to the journey to the market? Where we have regulatory, clinical, engineering, or other. And as Kim mentioned, we're still in that COVID sphere as we speak. And has COVID-19 impacted your ability to develop your device pipeline? You could choose from a clinical point of view, regulatory, engineering, or other. We have two more questions. Have you adopted new software or procedures to support your project the past 2 years? Yes or no? And lastly, what are some challenges your organization has faced when adopting new technology, such as training people, getting them up to speed, opposition to tech, lack of its implementation, or other? So I do want to thank you all. And like Kim said, we'll reveal the answers to this later on in the panel discussion.
Thank you, Sam. I appreciate that. So we'll take some time, in a few minutes to kind of start getting some updates and recap some of those polling questions. But I'd love to get started with some just initial questions that I would like to ask you guys. And I'll throw this out to the panel at this point in time. What are the key lessons that people have learned, and also that they need to know to help them maximize their project success during COVID? I mean, how is it that quickly as we could, prior to COVID taking place, and what are the lessons we've learned in helping to do it now in the COVID atmosphere?
I can jump in. I feel that the most important answer to that question is around work culture. We have teams on every continent you can count. And in the past, we've relied on a heavy consensus culture, bringing people together into design workshops, having project updates that involve people in real time. And now we're forced to recognize that the workforce is exposed to other constraints. People can no longer travel and do things face to face. They have a sick family member sitting in the room next to their kitchen table from which they work. Especially teams in India, for example, are very heavily affected by that and have been for a long time. So we have to shift. How do you shift to a culture that is, accommodates what people need to do, and yet you still drive for results? So that's the focus of my answer. And so what we did is we had to over communicate, we had to over clarify and repeatedly clarify priorities. We had to communicate top down frequently, skip levels, team meetings, check-ins. We had to create specific focus on programs, products, releases, release trains, reinforce the notion of KPIs, again, to clarify what priorities and outcomes we're working toward. And we had to create a work environment where people had a more flexible schedule. They could work on things when their personal situation allowed it. And finally, we had to increase the role of tools that support processes. So it's one thing to say Agile, it's another to actually truly adopt Agile tools and to let go of waterfall concepts and let the Agile tools and the culture around it actually drive behavior, provide accountability. Whether it is something lightweight like a smart sheet, or whether it's an actual Azure DevOps tool or something in Jira that you tie in your Microsoft Teams and so on, to reinforce again this culture of we know what we work on. Everybody can work on it when they can, and from wherever they are and whatever their situation is, even when they have to take breaks. They have 1 week where they work 60 hours, and the next week they work 10, and then to create rituals and sort of a culture of recognizing all of that and then celebrating when we actually move in the right direction. Kim, you're mute. Kim, you're on mute. I can't hear you.
Yeah, it looks like Kim, there's some sort of...
Oh, sorry, my name is not Kim.
Yeah, it's breaking up a lot for me too. I can't hear anything.
So while Kim is catching up his audio, why don't the next panelist take the...
I can jump on to on what you're talking about, Ulf. I mean, I work in production, so I was supporting the maybe design changes and design improvements. And as part of that, we had challenges. As soon as the COVID hit, the entire workforce went offline. Working remote, right? So they are not on site. And we had challenges. We had struggles like, hey, how to make sure the right deliverables are getting done. We did see a bigger impact right in the beginning, but I think the main thing as a team we need to understand is we have patients to serve. We need to make sure our devices are getting out there right safely and then on time. So first of all, we need to make sure our supply chain is intact. There are no cutoffs in there. We need to identify who is the stakeholder, whom should we reach out to. So every person, I think one of the challenges we had in our business is a 5-minute talk can become a 1-hour discussion over the Zoom, right? So you can just knock out someone's desk for 5-minute discussion, but now on Zoom, you are taking an hour or even more time to discuss the same kind of talk. So we needed to really remove those ambiguity from the process. We need to make sure the right tools are in there. So we have Microsoft Teams that we use, and we know how to reach out to the right people. Every person in the team has the right amount of contact, and every person in the team has the right stakeholders, identifying that who is your stakeholder, whom to communicate, how to communicate, and how to meet within the team. So we had all those tools, processes identified right in the beginning. And I think as we all kind of like agree, we all learned along the way to make it more better and better day by day. But now we are at a point and say that we are operating, even we are remote, we are operating with the same force as we're supposed to be before the pandemic. So I think a lot of these things has taught us, and we had to schedule going back to the office, doing the testing of the product and all that with the schedule and with the proper planning. So the planning has increased quite a bit, but it gives us fruit in the end.
Thanks. Who wants to go next?
Sure, I can go. So we were a company of 7 people when the pandemic hit, and we were right at the closing steps of our Series A, one of our tranches for that. So that led to some interesting and stressful times with, money being, we're not at Medtronic anymore or Boston Scientific where we have, the big umbrella to kind of cover us. And so what we were forced to do was really pare down and buckle down on what our priorities and our scope was. Specifically, we had, like anyone has, a pretty robust roadmap for where we're at, where we're heading. And it really forced us down to program management 101 and just pare down to like our 3 top priorities, really focus on those. Another factor for us is because we were small and nimble, we relied on a lot of consultants. And so we had to make some quick decisions on who were the most critical and in what roles. And as we've all suffered through Zoom meetings, really pare down to the essence of who are the key people, the key decision makers, and who are there to, for lack of a better word, to hang out and really force those decisions, have meaningful meetings, and really drive decisions. And from an EQ standpoint, it forced myself and our CEO to really lean on the EQ side of it, because we knew as part of this, we were going to hurt some people's feelings, because people are used to consensus culture. They're used to being part of the room. They want to be where it happens. And there are times where you just couldn't do that. And it was unfortunate. And we had to make some decisions around that. And we did. And everyone rallied behind that overall. But just changing the train and making that pivot was a little tough up front. But they were tough decisions that had to be made. I'm sure everyone had other similar tough decisions that had to be made.
Yeah, I can very much echo that feeling. Our company did start as a more hybrid, kind of online first business. We are headquartered in New York, however, but during the pandemic, we have nearly doubled in size and continue to grow. And that, of course, has resulted in challenges that have been highlighted. Technology has been a huge factor there, and we have had to adapt to new tools, and many of them have been mentioned. Many ways of Zoom has been a blessing and a curse, and we have had to modify a little bit ways of working, not just synchronously, but also asynchronously, documenting a lot of the processes, a lot of the meetings, including key stakeholders, like you said. But even beyond teamwork, I think there was a big impact on how we conduct our research, how we conduct our clinical trials and our studies. And similar to employees, our participants all of a sudden could not show up in person or at our sites for studies. So we have very much shifted to a fully remote and distributed method of doing our clinical research, which actually has proven out to be very successful. And that if there was one positive thing from this whole pandemic, it was actually proving the benefit of remote trials and how efficacious they can be.
Okay, am I back, you guys? Can you hear me?
Yes, you are.
Oh, great. Okay. Not sure what happened there. It said I was trying to log in twice, so I apologize for that. But I would love to ask a follow-up question as I was listening to the comments here towards the end is, how do you guys follow up, with the new norm, with the virtual engagement process that we're all doing right now? How do you measure the insights gap? Is there an area? How do you follow up from a Zoom call? Back in the old days when we had our meetings, you could record the meetings, you could take notes on a whiteboard, on the tear-off white, paper pad, things like that. You could tape them up onto the wall. How do you now measure those, or do you have insights gaps that you're finding are taking place because of the virtual engagement process?
I can go first. So yes, of course, there are gaps. I think we had to really strengthen our meeting culture. Make sure that there is a scribe assigned. Make sure that people comment in Teams so that you have a record. Then you record the meeting. But more importantly, just recording a 3-hour-long meeting and then expecting the next 100 people to sit through 3 hours. There needs to be the discipline of condensing what the information in the meeting, what the decisions were, at least what the time stops in the recording are that are worth looking at. And over time, what I've been seeing is an improvement in this space where people say, oh, later on we're going to be asked to publish notes. And not just be, lazy and just publish the recording. So we can just as well start taking the notes in real time. Coming from a tech background where you have things like Etherpads, where you're used to taking notes in real time, that comes second nature. But we had to really drive that and introduce that.
Fantastic. I see some of you others nodding your heads. What are your thoughts? Ajay, what are some of your thoughts on that?
Sure. I think for us, there were two things. One is the tool that you are going to be using. So we use OneNote. So everyone in the team, have access to the notes. So we just open up basically OneNote during the meeting and start typing into those notes. And then basically we make sure that every thought is captured. So there's only one person who is typing, but we know like what kind of discussions is going around. It's not like someone in the back end is actually typing the notes and capturing them for their personal use. It's basically the project notes that one person as a scribe is typing, collecting all the information discussed during the meeting. Second thing is the organization. So organizing those are important, right? First you can capture the note, but what are you going to do with those notes? Right. So that is the next step, basically figuring out, take out the actions and find out who is the owner of those actions. So we do that right during the meeting time and make sure the actions from the meeting are identified. And second is who is going to be the owner of those action items. So kind of like, making sure the notes are there. And second is the project management is there. In the past, we all kind of like jot down together in the conference room and work together on a problem. But nowadays, this electronic tool, digitization is our friend, but we need to make sure how we properly organize them and make sure the action items and the leaders and all those are clear to the team member.
Does it sounds to me like you both talked about assigning a scribe, somebody to take notes and things like that. That almost sounds like a step backwards to me. It almost sounds like we're doing something, yes, we're utilizing this virtual technology, but we're kind of taking a step backwards to have somebody specifically take notes when, we talked about you can record the meetings and things like that. Wouldn't it be extremely beneficial if there was a way to actually be able to have a discussion where an executive summary was provided or something like that, where it actually gives you the information that you need quickly, efficiently, and somebody doesn't have to sit and go through all the notes that are provided and things like that. Does that make sense to anybody here?
Ultimately, having a well-written, condensed summary of the meeting and publishing that people can look at, executive summary at the top, a few bullets, a little bit of context, potentially the context of who to talk to or references. You can glance at, and within 2 minutes you've absorbed the essence of a 3-hour meeting. That is, of course, is a gold standard. I need to drive the culture in that direction.
Nicola, how about you? I see you nodding your head. What are your thoughts on this?
I agree fully with what the other presenters mentioned. And in addition, I would add beyond just creating, making sure to document, having a unified set of tools that the team as a whole can align on using. Especially, I think in the early days, there was a lot of different tools being proposed and used. And ultimately, I think what was important for everybody to align on a single set of tools that everybody can use and then know where to find that documentation. So we are heavily reliant on the Google Workspace ecosystem, but also the Atlassian line of products like Jira and Confluence for our documentation and sharing of things such as executive summaries, meeting notes, and across teams, so that we don't always have to be included in all of the meetings and all of the one-on-ones. We can always have that asynchronous update.
Stephen, let me ask you a question. What tools are you guys currently using to support your ongoing projects? How are you keeping people engaged? How are you keeping your stakeholders, your key opinion leaders engaged in the discussion?
So thank you, Kim, for the question. So we're a consulting firm, and we work in 22 markets around the world. So it's a mix of conventional tools, really. We've always been heavy users of internet conferencing. And in our discipline, which is market access and reimbursement, you really need redundancy in your communication to make sure that everyone understands what is. Reimbursement's a complex topic, and culturally, there's a lot of room for misunderstanding. So we do things in writing and then redundantly with video conferencing. Microsoft Teams has been a useful tool for us, but nothing too extraordinary. We also find that if our local teams can give us direct access in our Boston office to their original in-language texts, so for example, coding and coverage policies in a foreign language, it still helps us to put eyes on those using translation software to better infer and understand how their system works. So we have consultants in all of those markets, but we need to work as a team with them. So in short reply, that's really what we've done. If I may, Kim, I'd like to sort of share in my world the bigger impact that I've seen of the COVID era. Since we have to do a little bit with early stage companies, but more with commercialization types of issues, what I saw in our space was a huge problem in executing clinical trials. And that was a barrier across the board for many reasons, including the enlistment of worthy sites that were ready to go and able to cooperate because they had so much going on. Our issue that revolves around that is the reimbursement of the clinical trial in the United States. And I found that there was particular economic sensitivity about getting those trials reimbursed in this period. And then the other issue was just disruption of business flows for the implantable companies that had elective products. Their world went a little bit upside down for a while. And the unlucky ones saw a huge precipitous drop in their sales volumes. Our role in that was to help them if there was a silver lining around reimbursement where they had loosened the rules, for example, allowing the billing of services in outpatient instead of inpatient, so they could guide their customers on those things. and continue to achieve the sales in the marketplace. I can't say that most companies came out unscathed. Most of them did take a hit during this period. It was a good time for bench R&D, but not such a good time for clinical development and commercialization.
Do you see that changing, or do you feel that people becoming are more adept to being able to utilize the virtual environment at this point in time, or do you see it continuing to go the way it's going?
So there is definitely Zoom overload, no doubt, because it seems with the convenience of these tools, the quantity of meetings seems to have grown exponentially. And professional engagement, I think, is a little bit diminished by not being in person. So I'm not someone who pretends that the virtual world is superior or equivalent. I do think that some in-person interaction is still important. It has some advantages, but I think it's going to be a mix going forward. For sure, the necessity of in-person travel is much lower now, and for some of us, at least, that's a very welcome thing. I'm not complaining.
I completely agree with that. With the few in-person meetings coming up, I know some of the trade shows, some of the big trade shows, ASA, AAOS, RSNA are coming up here shortly in the United States, and we've actually got people that are going to be attending, not only from a vendor standpoint, but from a physician standpoint. Do you see these types of shows being affected by what we've learned over this past year? Do you see these shows starting to kind of diminish in numbers because we've gotten very good at being able to utilize these virtual conferences? Or do you think that those are still going to be extremely important because people want to be able to socialize with each other?
Well, remember that the medical certification requirements will still persist. Now, you probably could do some of those things for physicians in a virtual world, potentially. And the need for relationship building and meeting new people will continue. I'll feel for sure they're going to be diminished. It will be a different, smaller world, but it will still exist. We're starting to see it pick up. I would guess in my field, the conferences we attend and sponsor, it'll be about 50% of normal through the end of this year. And next year, we might see 3/4.
Appreciate it. Well, Kevin, let me ask you a question. What are some of the things that you've learned over this past year? How has it changed kind of your standard operating procedure, what you're doing, what you've been doing from what you did back in 2019? And what changes do you see that will continue to be made or have to be made coming up in the next 6 to 12 months?
Sure. So again, my background right now is we are at a small startup. So some of the bigger company impacts didn't necessarily tidal wave over us in the same way that would have happened in some of the larger firms. We're not multi-site in that same way, but we do have people at different locations. Some of the, for lack of a better word, some of the benefits were it forced us to have better selection of the tools that we're using and better selection of how we're applying them. One example that has been mentioned here that was very useful for us from a ease and worked for the whole scope of our talent base was we applied Monday.com, which I'm guessing most of you are somewhat familiar with as a project management tool. It's not nowhere near as powerful as Microsoft Project, but it is good at the managing like the task-oriented aspects. We've gotten very efficient at using that tool and being able to virtually use it and deploy that across the programs that we now have running and the teams that we have running. And I don't see that changing over the next year or so. As far as some of the things that have been for the worse, we also had a culture of like everyone of face-to-face. You get a little bit more done, and having to get more efficient at being friendly with the text messaging on your phone. To your point of something you said earlier, it seems like you're going steps back. In some ways, we had to take some steps back, and a phone call replaced the face-to-face meetings. But again, because of the nature of our size, being a startup, being small, we were able to handle that in ways that I don't think if I was still at Medtronic, we would have been able to handle in the same way when I had a 20-person team. So From a startup standpoint, we're early, so we're lucky in that regard.
Let me go to the flip side of that. Joe, from a Medtronic standpoint, what did Medtronic do? I mean, being the world's largest medical device manufacturer, did they have plans in place, or was it something that some Band-Aids were applied and now you're looking at a new contingency plan moving forward? What happened there?
Sure. I mean, there were no plans in place, right? I mean, this came out of surprise for all of us. I can tell you we were going naturally to the office every day, and then suddenly it just completely gone. That's what happened. I mean, I can tell you when this happened, it was sometimes in March last year. I was supposed to go to office on Monday. On Friday, I did not go to office. And then Monday, everyone is like, we all will be working from home. Literally every day, I mean, in the beginning, we thought it will be just 3 months. And then we thought, okay, maybe next more 3 months, maybe 6 more months. And now we are into it for 1.5 years or close to 2 years by the end of the year, right? So, I mean, from our end, we had to, so one thing that we had to do is getting our priorities straight as a business was very important. We needed to make sure what kind of things we need to do, where we need to pay attention, what kind of things we can slow down for the time being, and where we can put focus onto it. So as a team leader, there are two things we did. One thing is we have to do the product testing. We have to have some people going into the business. So we have to draw the rules, like who can go into the business, what could be the rules of going them inside business and operating those. So those has to be in place for the safety of everyone, every employee who is going into the campus. The second is how the team is going to be operating, because we have meetings in the office. We can talk to each other and figure those out things naturally. But now in the COVID world, we don't know how we are going to do that. So as a team leader, we need to make sure that the priorities and communication channels are straightforward for the team member, how to approach them, how to work with them in the team manner. And I think one of the major challenge we had working from home was the timing of the meetings were kind of stretched from morning till late evening or late even in the night. That actually took a big toll on literally, including me, on every employee that we have. And we need to go back and say, hey, we need to cut down these hours. I mean, we can't operate the way we are doing right now. I mean, we need to put some boundaries around it. We know we are working with the international team. I mean, we were working very successfully before, but now it's a norm, right? There is no lunch hour, right? You are eating lunch at 2 p.m., I mean, while you are on the Zoom, right? So a lot of those things, a lot of those habits have changed, and we need to pull ourselves back and define those things, and then make sure we are operating efficiently, and then people are giving time to themselves, to their families, and making sure those things are organized in a nice manner.
I completely agree with that. You know, there has to be some sort of work-life balance. And we found that when a lot of us went home for the first time, I had never worked from my home office. I had always worked, from an airplane, from Delta, sitting on Delta Airlines, typing out emails and things like that. And when I came home and started to work, my office, was walking from my bedroom down to my office and spending literally probably 4 more hours a day in my home office than I ever did when I was out on the road working. So you're right, there has to be some sort of balance there. We have to get away from the majority of Zoom calls. We all sit on 6 or 7 of those a day. We have to be able to find that balance. And at this point in time, I just have to kind of put in a shameless plug for the company that I work with, Within3, is being able to add an additional overtime discussion platform. And again, it doesn't have to be Within3. It could be anybody that offers an overtime discussion, something that allows people to come in when they would like, to be able to leave when they would like. I think some of the best thoughts that are ever received are thoughts that after you hang up from a Zoom call and you say, oh, I wish I would have. I wish I would have said this, or I wish I would have said that. And unfortunately, you don't get that opportunity. But with an overtime type of discussion added to a Zoom call or added to a live one-on-one meeting, you get those opportunities to come in. It's convenient. You can think about what you want to say before you say it, and then you can come back and add to your thoughts. So I think, as we're talking about this, everybody has said Zoom calls are great. We all know how to use them. We all hope that live in-person meetings come back. But if we add kind of a third leg to that stool, it's that over time type of discussion that would be extremely beneficial for everybody as well. So, Sam, let me bring you back in. I'd love to get some answers to some of those initial polling questions that you put out there.
Absolutely. So let me just open it right here. Okay, so the first one that I asked was, did your human factors regarding your device development change due to COVID? And overwhelmingly, majority voted yes, 43%. 29% said a little bit. And again, 29% said no. In regards to the decentralized question, 43% would rather go with decentralized in the future. Again, 29 yes, 29 maybe. I thought this one was quite interesting. For those who have devices already in the market, what were your biggest challenges? And majority said engineering or regulatory. Not that many people said.
Let me follow up on that question right there, Sam, too. Is why was engineering such a problem, such a challenge in 2020, or still is in 2021? Anybody on the panel that can answer that or come to a consensus on that?
Maybe I can just add a thought. I think we all know about EUMDR regulations that came to the picture. And the date of application for EUMDR certification was, I think, May 26, I think this year, right? And as part of that, we have to recertify our devices under EUMDR. So there is a lot of new requirements came into the picture. We have separate teams who is just working onto those. There could be new engineering testing that you may have to done based on the new regulations. So a lot of those requirements, a lot of those things became a little bit of challenging while working remote, right? And then a lot of those things have delayed too. I think UMDR did realize that because of COVID, there is an impact on those submissions. I believe they extended the timeline, but still, I mean, as an industry and every company has to work through it and make sure they timely certify their devices under those new requirements. So that's the challenge we had.
Do any of you feel that both R&D and the engineering side became more difficult during COVID, or was there any relaxed regulations, anything that people did to make it a little easier? I mean, all the way from simply changing a color on a medical device, requires, a lot of work and a lot of time and a lot of energy. Did it get easier or did it get more difficult in the last year? Kevin, I'm going to ask you that as a new startup. I'm sure you're still dealing with the R&D side of things. Were you able to conduct your R&D and your engineering in such a way that was beneficial to the company?
Yep. I have a visitor that just showed up. Sorry about that. But yeah, so from a R&D standpoint, in startup mode, it actually didn't affect us all that much. Honestly, it was impactful for the first month or so while we were getting our virtual teams up and running. We were going third party for a lot of our development, and they had put together some nice mitigations pretty quickly. So from an overall impact to us, it was readjusting our communication channels mostly, but from a development standpoint, wasn't dramatically affected. Sorry, I have a child to manage.
No problem. It's that time of day. So go ahead, Sam. I'm going to turn it back over to you for our other three questions that we had conducted the poll on.
Yeah, and then the other one we had, let me just pull that up over here. So we had another question, which was, has COVID-19 impacted your ability to develop your device pipeline? And 57% said clinical in regards to COVID. The rest got 5-6%. So I thought that was interesting, Kim. Have you adopted new software procedures in the past 2 years? I think we can all agree the consensus to this answer was yes. I think almost 90%. And then the last question was, what are some challenges you face trying to implement new technology? People said 43% lack of implementation. So I think, Kim, that was very interesting as well in terms of, you can have new technology, but if you don't know how to properly implement it, it doesn't go that far. So
that's a great. I would love to ask the panel this from a clinical and training standpoint. How did COVID impact the training of the products? How did COVID impact that implementation that Sam was just talking about? I know being a rep for many, many years, we relied a lot on the home office on providing us training and education, especially on ongoing devices, especially on devices that were being utilized in the OR. And, we had to be standing there by the physician as he was using the device. And so obviously we had to have a great amount of training. How have you moved that training and education into the virtual reality space, or the virtual engagement space, I should say, in 2020?
I can speak to that a little bit. So when I think about the physical device world, we had to go into overdrive mode in terms of working with our provider customers to understand their requirements for personnel coming on site, and then to convince them that our field personnel and trainers and so on are meeting their requirements. Not every provider matches the requirements of the next. So the bunny suit and the double goggles and this and that and the other you do with one doesn't match what the next one wants, but you have to win that trust of everyone. So we just over invested in that and focused on that, especially in the beginning, because if we can't get our field guys into the facility, then treatment stops. It's that simple. And when it comes to cancer treatment, that's not a fun topic. When it comes to training users of our software products, there too, at first we took that first approach and said we have to get in, and then we switched to a train-the-trainer model, where we figured out that if we focus on key individuals in the provider facility, then they can train the other users of our software and services. And then when it comes to the pure services products, it's a whole different story, where it has more to do with using modern learning platforms, building the learning into the user interfaces. Maybe we want to pass it on to the next person while Kim is sorting things out.
Oh, Kim, it looks like you're muted. Yeah.
Anybody else who would like to make a comment on that? Training and education, for the clinical group, for the implementation of a device. Anybody else would like to make a comment on how it worked or what was different?
I guess I can offer a perspective. It might not be the conventional one, but I think the distinction that Olaf mentioned between the hardware and software as a medical device is important. So for us, we as a company develop digital therapeutics, meaning that we are software first already. We build apps essentially that can be used for prevention, management, treatment of diseases. And so I feel COVID and the new normal, as you say, has not impacted us as much as it would a hardware manufacturing company. Yes, because one difference was in retaining and acquiring new talent, especially on the engineering side, because we place a big focus, especially on AI, machine learning, and kind of integrating these new software technologies into our products. And now with the ability of remote work and everybody being able to work, from every state, it has introduced a new dynamic into how we think about recruiting, retaining people, and competing also with the very big players in the software field.
That's interesting. I would like to find out from everybody here on the panel, so I'd like to kind of just go around the panel and find out, what was the biggest thing that you learned from COVID, from 2020 on into 2021 right now, and what are you going to do in the future to make sure that you are ready if we go back into complete lockdown, that you're ready for whatever challenges are going to be presented to you what's going to be your biggest, what's the word I'm looking for? The most important thing that you need to know for 2021 on into 2022 from a virtual standpoint? Biggest thing that you learned, and what is going to be the biggest thing you're going to keep with you moving forward? Stephen, can I start with you?
Of course. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, perfect. So we had to put in place some cloud-based solutions to access common data with the right security measures and such. So we're a consulting firm, and we serve, the top 20 device companies and a broad range of startups. So you had to make sure that all those systems were compliant with all the contractual requirements you had. We were already pretty active users of virtual conferencing already, which is inherent with some of the work that we did. So that wasn't such a big switch. There's a lot more sort of document sharing that's going on, and probably some additional sort of project management systems that need to be developed as these types of things expand. The analytics side in our consulting practice actually grew tremendously during COVID. I think the industry had a lot more time to do analytics since they weren't flying around going to conferences. So that was actually a positive thing for our company. And we're looking forward to developing those relationships further as the year progresses and into next year. I think at this point we know the drill. Physical spaces would have to be shut down again if, God forbid, we had another shutdown. But people have learned how to work efficiently in that way and to get things done. I think the biggest issue for us, and probably across the industry, is training new young people who are fresh out of school. That's hard to do in a 100% virtual environment. In our case, there's no textbook to teach reimbursement. You really learn it by doing it with the mentorship of senior people. It's hard to do that on a day-to-day basis if you're remote.
Agreed with that. I don't think I could have done it, to tell you the honest truth. Some of the things that I was able to talk about in the OR with the surgeon standing there, I probably could not have learned in a virtual environment. You need to be able to touch things. You need to be able to have hands-on. Would you agree? The medical device arena is very much a hands-on arena. People need to hold it, touch it, feel it, look at it, and actually play with that device. So how do we get around that? If we're in a virtual arena that we're in right now, how do we get around not being able to do that? What are some of the thoughts on that?
Maybe I can add. I had this similar situation too. Actually, I was about to say that is one of the drawbacks we also had. I did hire a couple of people over the pandemic, and as part of that, a couple of them were actually fresh entry-level people, and we had to train them. From engineering perspective, I think one of the brilliant idea the team came out was sending them the devices. So ship them the devices to their home, and then do the virtual assembly or disassembly of the device together while they are working on their device. First of all, you go through the device mechanism, help them explain how does the device work. We do have a lot of videos. How does the device work? How does it operate? We let the person play with it, understand components, understand material, and then we do the assembly and disassembly together to understand how is it assembled, what kind of challenges we face. So all of those kind of activities. It's still not up to the mark that you do in person, but still we kind of figure out somewhere in between where we can bridge the gap by having them hold the device too.
Yep. So, Joe, let me ask you just a follow-up question to that, like I asked Stephen. What was the biggest challenge you faced in 2020 and into 2021, and what are you taking away with that's saying this worked? I'm going to use this moving forward.
I think I touched on a couple of things. The challenges we faced in the beginning, we had no idea how we're going to be operating. And one thing that we learned was after a few months that a lot of this work could be done remotely. right? We don't have to go to office for certain kind of activities. So what we did was, as a big company, we had the leverage of having the tools and software readily available to us. So we don't have to implement a new system like Microsoft Teams. We already had all those in play. We just need to figure out opportunities, how we can utilize them, how we can leverage them to our benefit. So kind of like setting up the timeline, using the project management tools. Those were a couple of things we learned. And I think we are ready. If something happens in the near future, we are already ready. And apparently from Medtronic side, we are actually still not back in office. Everyone is working remotely. There is a plan to be back in the office, but it depends on the team that you are supporting. It depends on your role. So that there's going to be an hybrid, and all those models will come into the picture in the near future. So I think the challenge part, which I mentioned about training the new engineers, is very true. I mean, that is you can't do really from remote. So one of the things as a company we are doing is making sure the new people are coming on board very effectively, developing a plan for them, what we can do to make sure they are fully on board and they are creating value and they are also enjoying being part of the company. Because it doesn't go just that they are helping us, right? I mean, it goes both ways, that they are being appreciated in the company, they are liking the culture. And the main important thing with Medtronic is we highly focus on engagement. So we look for the engagement. We really find out how do we make sure the people are actually engaged with the company, engaged with the culture, and all those sort of things. So that was a little bit of challenging in the beginning, but we learned, we identified the ways, and I think we are getting better at it now.
Kevin, what about you?
Yeah. So some of the things that we definitely learned was just how to best handle our communication channels, both internal to our team, but with our various partners and suppliers. To work within the the virtual structure. Similarly, I think everyone's kind of used to it now. No one's looking forward to going back to a fully virtual situation. But if we had to, we could. As far as concerns for kind of the next step future, where our programs are, we're starting to get right into that clinical world. And we are very much at risk being a non-COVID or pandemic-centric technology that if we were a year ahead in our device, we would have been massively impacted by the way clinical trials were run at hospitals. We were fortunate that we were not there. But if it were to happen again, we know that from our FDA experience with our pre-subs and whatnot, everything was delayed for us because of obviously bigger priorities that we're going through. And in the clinical trial space, it's we have good partners that we're talking to and we're working with, but we know that we will immediately go from a interesting challenge to very much not the priority. And so from a business standpoint, one thing that we'll certainly have to take a look at is, and did a little bit in the past and will in the future, is what are our number 2, our number 3, or number 4 priorities that we can move the needle on those forward if we have to make this pivot, while also going back to our board of directors and our investors to make sure that they're aware of what the impact is and why they're not seeing the the timelines hit because of things that are beyond their control, because quite frankly they don't care. So
thank you. Nicola, what did you learn? What was the biggest thing you learned, and what are you going to move forward with in the rest of this year and on into 2022 or 2020?
Like said, so we are a software as a medical device company. So I guess our ability to kind of digitally transform in the wake of the pandemic has not been taxed as much as many other companies. I think one learning that was critical was just realizing how fragile the healthcare system is to deal with such a situation. And these cracks are now evident to everybody. So I think you asked, like, what's the difference between 2020, 2021? I think whereas 2020, it was much more difficult to get some people to embrace digital health, digital therapeutics. I think 2021, there's much more alignment across all stakeholders, sponsors, payers, regulators. Digital health is here to stay, things like telemedicine. and definitely I think digital therapeutics. So I think that's the trend to look out for.
It's interesting. You said that the telemedicine's here to stay. I think that's something that physicians have wanted to have stay for a long time. I know that I live about 40 miles away from my physician, and being able to sit and talk with him in a virtual environment is so much easier than having to drive to his office and participate there. So I'm hoping that the device companies can have that same mindset, that virtual is here to stay, that we did learn something. We can cut costs with all the travel that we've had to deal with, and that we can get better at what we're doing. I heard earlier today that we really have jumped ahead. COVID pushed us ahead by about 5 years. We've had to do things that we just weren't normally going to have to do. And so now that we've moved ahead, it's time to kind of rip the Band-Aids off and put that specific plan in place of what we want to do and how we're going to do it. So, Olaf, what are your thoughts? Biggest thing you've learned and biggest thing you're taking away at this point in time?
I can echo most of what folks said here. Collaboration, goal setting, all these cultural elements, and running the business more efficiently and effectively, and so on. We made leaps and bounds. Coming from a tech company where Slack was the norm for years, or WebEx work within Cisco, there's a bit of a catching up here in the medical device world. Then things like performing maintenance remotely, installing software remotely. Amazing things that we've been doing since the 1990s, but in the medical device world is new oftentimes. So reflecting these, this was really an opportunity to accelerate many of these developments. Also, echoing what somebody else said before, is that acculturating, training a new person, especially new college graduates, is the biggest challenge. Because the way they have been learning, we have been teaching, was always in the classroom and so on. So fortunately there too, because of COVID, there are now big shifts. Lots of colleges moving their things online, including the labs and professional training programs. And in the context of my role in other tech companies outside of Varian, there is a whole an explosion of innovation in the augmented reality world, where maintenance, training, assistance, we call it telemedicine, but really it's a remote assistance of a person with certain expertise, is taking off in the space of health and human safety, for example. There is literally a leapfrogging of decades of what people do with the help of remote telepresence systems, augmented reality, and AI-based tools. So it's really exciting. But the biggest challenge is, culture eats strategy and everything else for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And you have to really overinvest in bringing people into your culture and getting them a secure place and understanding what the cultural references are, what the goals are, how to work with people. Nothing trumps that.
Do you find that people sometimes are resistant to change? The old adage is, I drive a Ford because my dad drove a Ford. I don't know why I like Ford, it's just that my dad drove it. So I'm going to keep doing the same things that sort of worked, kind of worked, but there's no stepping out on a limb at this point in time. Do you find that, let me just put it this way, I find that sometimes medical device companies are slower to change because it's harder to adapt new technology, new techniques, new procedures. You guys, does anybody here echo that or agree or disagree with that?
Oh, absolutely. Part of the reason is it's not unwillingness or incompetence. It's that the cost of making changes is so high, and the cost of making mistakes is even higher. Once you have lost that trust, that once you've made it onto the front page of the Wall Street Journal, it's really, really hard to dig out from that. I think that's just the institutional reality in this industry.
Yeah, agreed with that. Sam, I'd like to turn. Is there any questions from the audience that we can be answering at this point in time?
Yeah, so if anybody has a question or a comment, you can use the Discuss tab to the right. But again, a lot of good points, collaboration and implement your technology were raised. Doesn't look like we have any questions here. Kim, do you have any final remarks or anything you'd like to say?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to be able to sum it up and say that everything that we've talked about today, there are still definitely gaps in what we're doing. And how are we going to clear up those gaps? How are we going to be able to get better at the virtual engagement process? As we're all trying to gain insights on specific topics, subjects, tools, devices, procedure, techniques, whatever it might be, we all find that there's something that's kind of lacking along the way. I go all the way back to the first of our discussion where we talked about, people taking notes, scribes taking notes. In the virtual world with which we're working in, there's got to be a better way to do that. So how do we develop better ways of collecting and organizing and putting together this information that we're gaining from a virtual world? And I think that's something that we all need to take a look at. It's something that we all need to plan on, as we continue to move forward, is how do we continue to collect the information the very best way we can with which to utilize and move our companies forward. And so I appreciate all of your guys' time. Any final thoughts from any of you? All right. Well, I appreciate everybody's time today. Sam, thank you so much for allowing us to be a part of this panel discussion. I hope it was beneficial, and I'll turn it back over to you.